Hello, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm sorry about these technical problems because we recorded my presentation in order to be sure to avoid technical problems, but in the end, they appeared as well. But it's my pleasure now to start the Congress and to start with the introductory lesson of Riccardo Crescenzi. Maybe, Riccardo, maybe you can show up. Riccardo is there. And of course, Riccardo is a pretty well-known researcher. It's no need to present him. I just want you to remind that he's a professor of economic geography at the London School of Economics and Political Science. He has been a Jean Monnet Fellow at the European University Institute, a visiting scholar at the Tubman Center at Harvard University and at the University of California in Los Angeles, as well as an associate at the Center for International Development at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. He is currently the LSA principal investigator of a very large collaborative research program funded by Horizon Europe and the YOCA Research and Innovation on Inequalities in the era of global megatrends. Given the most academic part, Riccardo is now an editor of regional studies and also an associate editor of a journal of regional science. He has a long track of recording, of teaching and research in regional economic development, especially in FDI, in GVS, and in the analysis and the evaluation of public policies. This research is published in top peer-reviewed journals, and you probably know about his most recent book on Routledge in 2023, which the name is Harnessing Global Value Chains for Regional Development, where it explores how regions, cities, and clusters can build and reshape global value chains for local enhancement. So I let the floor now to the presentation of Riccardo Crescenzi on global value changes, foreign investment, and regional development.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm truly delighted to be able to give this keynote at the ERSA conference. And so thanks to the organizing committee and of course Maristela and Noor who make all this possible. Today, in my talk, I will, as you mentioned, discuss about global value chains and regional development. Most of the work that I will cite comes from this joint book with Oliver Harman at Oxford University and the LSE. And I will try and argue how important it is for our understanding of regional development and, as a result, for our understanding of regional development policies to reflect and analyze the position of each individual region, of each individual city into global flows of capital, human capital, knowledge, and technology that are bundled together into global value chains. So I will try to show how thinking about global value chains is not something exclusively in the realm of international economics or international business sometimes, but this should really be fully embedded into our regional science literature, as it has already happened, but this should be done even more. And in particular, understanding global value chains should become a fundamental component of regional policies. Let me share a few slides while I talk. Hope you can see my screen. If this is not the case, Andrea, please scream. So like I mentioned,
perfect.
Thank you. So like I mentioned, this comes from a book that I have quoted with Oliver Harman, where we try to bring together a lot of the existing work that has been done on global value chains and the intersection between global value chains and regional development. So the book is really like an attempt to summarize what has been done by very, very prominent scholars in different fields, including ours, economic geography, regional science. So to summarize, to present these ideas to policymakers with the idea to inform knowledge-based, evidence-based regional development policies. So the menu, like for this talk. First of all, I'm sure this is not necessary, but let me just like bring in some key ideas from like global value chains. What is a global value chain? We are reading a lot now about global value chains when we read about the new geopolitical landscape, but I think it's helpful just to like think through some of the key concepts that are helpful when we want to, point number 2, bring global value chains into regional development and try to think, okay, why do global value chains matter for regional development? Why should we take global value chains on board when we think about regional development? And then, having like set the stage, we'll ask ourselves, okay, but how can regions, how can cities harness them? How can regions and cities use global value chains to their advantages? I will not argue that everything is good about global value chains. There are advantages and disadvantages, but as always, there are important opportunities that can be leveraged, that can be used if supported by the right type of policies to the advantage of local communities. And they will argue that harnessing global value chains fundamentally means upgrading for regions. And they will discuss what I mean by upgrading. And so what we need to understand is how can we upgrade, move up in terms of more value addition at the local level. So upgrading is possible. Is it possible to like move along the value chain? How I will show and move towards stages of the value chain that incorporate more value at the local level, that allow our workers to pursue more sophisticated tasks that can command higher wages. So regions can upgrade, and in the book we have collected evidence produced by us and by others on how this is possible. And it is possible to upgrade for regions, I will argue, if they manage to build global value chains, embed global value chains in the local economy. You don't want like this connection to the global value chain to remain disconnected from the local environment. We don't want a white elephant. Like think about subsidiaries of large multinational firms that are only like totally self-contained, that don't interact with the local environment. In our like less developed, less advanced regions, I think about southern Italy, where I've been traveling before like joining you, and you can really see like cathedrals in the desert, or what remains of these cathedrals in the desert. So what you want is that your global connectivity is very well embedded into the local environment. That's why we say you need to build these connections, you need to embed them, but also, as I will show, regions have the tools to reshape global value chains, to make global value chains work to their advantage, to create connectivity where there is no connectivity yet. So I will argue that what we need for these 3 possibilities to materialize at the local level, including in less developed regions, we need to think about a new generation of public policies. Connectivity, different types of non-local proximities are not another element, just another ingredient of public policies, but we need to think about regional development policies in a new way that takes into account global connectivity from the very beginning. And I will argue that to do this, we need a horizontal and a vertical engagement. We need to think about what we are doing already in regional policies, but taking into account, okay, where are we? Where is our region? Where is our city in the distribution of global value, and where we want the region to be? But also we need to directly engage with specific selected value chains. That is the vertical engagement. Okay, and then I will conclude with some reflections on the future of global value chains in regions. And in particular, we'll discuss how global value chains can potentially support both the digital and the green transition, can offer regions opportunities for green upgrading and for digital upgrading. That is, making global value chains completely synergistic, for example, to the objective of the recovery plan. So the key takeaway, so what you will leave this presentation with, is the idea that for regions, it is indeed possible to upgrade. Regions can move towards more sophisticated, more advanced stages of the global value chains. Regional upgrading is indeed a feasible and realistic target. Beyond what has been suggested, for example, to regions to go into necessarily into high tech, into fancy sectors, and all regions trying to do the same. What we are arguing here is that regions can leverage their own strength and can upgrade towards more sophisticated, more advanced stages of the value chain, leveraging their existing strengths. So at the end of this talk, I will show you evidence to suggest that the regional upgrading is indeed feasible and realistic at the same time for all types of regions. Foreign direct investment can be one way to drive the process of upgrading. So foreign direct investment is not an objective in itself, attracting more FDI. That's what many regions have tried to do. What I will argue is that where we think about global connectivity through foreign direct investment in a global value chain logic, it is possible to leverage FDI as one of the possible tools to upgrade in the wider global value chain framework. And the third key message is that what we need to think about, in particular, for example, when we think about the future of cohesion policy, when we think about the future of regional development policies at the national level, when we think about the use of the Resilience and Recovery Fund, we need to think about policies that are GVC sensitive, that think about global value chains from the very beginning of their design stage. So we need global value chain policies that can support the regional engagement with the dynamic context of global value chain participation and positioning. So the fundamental message is we need policies to get on the chain. Okay, this will be the key take-home messages from this talk. But let me go one by one into like the key stages that we need in order to build and to convince you of these fundamental ideas, hopefully. So let me start by discussing what a global value chain is. Okay. So the global value chain describes the full range of activities. When we think about a value chain, we need to think about the full range of activities that firms and workers, for that sake, perform to bring all products from any products from its conception. So when we think about the product and the product that we want, to the end use, and very importantly, we have been doing work on green global value chains, to end use and beyond, so the afterlife of our products. So when we think about recycling, reuse. So this is the whole chain, from when we design the product to the production, then to the end use, okay? And this chain includes activities such as the design, the production, then the marketing, the necessary distribution, the support to the final consumer, and in the most recent views on value chains, what we do with our products after final consumers have used the products and have exhausted the benefits from the product. Okay, so this is like the value chain describes this full range of activities, going from the conception, the initial idea of any product that we have around us, to its end use, recycling, reuse, etc., etc. Okay, that's what we mean by value chain. So when we think about value chains, what we do when we think about the position of our economies in relation to this chain, what we are doing is like moving away from focusing on what our advantage is in final goods and services. So I get the end point of the chain. So I'm good at producing wine. That's the end point of the process. And I think about, okay, then what I need is to pursue in my local economy all the stages that I have described before. Or when I think about cotton, the same. Or when I think about mobile phones, or when I think about TVs. What if I want to produce that final goods and trade and exchange with other regions, with other countries, that final good, I need to think about the whole chain, from designing something that can fly in the international market to the production and then the distribution, etc., etc. So this is focusing on final goods. And this is what public policies, but in particular regional policies, have been thinking all the time, giving regions advice on how to do more sophisticated, more advanced, smarter final products, final goods. However, the story is slightly different. The reality of the global economy is slightly more complicated, or there is more to it. Look at this bike, for example. Okay, take a look at this bike. That is the final product, the bike that many of us used to ride to their office or that extensively use in their holidays. How many goods do you see? If you look at this bike, you think, okay, that's a bike I use every day. It's one bike. It's for me. It's one good. However, if we look closer to this bike, we see that there is a trick. This bike is composed of several individual components, from the saddle where we sit on, to the frame, to the brakes, the pedal, the wheels. And if we look at how bikes are produced around the globe, we see that different countries are lead exporters of one or more of these individual components. If you look at the saddle, we see that China is the top global exporters of bike saddles. Italy is the second, and Spain, where this conference is taking place or will take place, is Spain. Frame, again, we have China, Vietnam, Italy, but if we look at the brakes, we have a completely different set of actors: Japan, Singapore, Malaysia. So as you can see, this bike is not produced within the close boundaries of one individual firm, not even in the close boundaries of one individual region. So there is no region producing the whole bike. The individual components are produced in different countries, in different regions across the globe, and assembled in different hotspots that then bring to light the final bike that we all use. So thinking about and calibrating our policies on the idea, okay, I can contribute to the green economy by producing bikes, is fundamentally misleading. We need to think about, when we think about a bike, we need to think about even a bike, a very simple product, let alone thinking about a computer or a microprocessor even. Okay, so even thinking about a bike, when we think about a bike, we think about a very complex network of flows, of ideas, of course, behind these products, but then material goods that are then assembled and exchanged. This is what forms global value chains. These individual components of the bike have different values, different value attached to them, different degrees of technological sophistication, and very different regions that are the centers, that are the hotspots where these individual components are produced and that build advantage and local opportunities. Okay, so even thinking about the bike requires the consideration of a much wider, very integrated, very complex network that is precisely what we mean by a global value chain. And when we think about trade, for a long time, when we think about trade mostly as final goods, the blue line in this chart, we see that we are harnessing the opportunities only of a very small share, or a relatively small share, of international trade. If you look at the orange bar in the chart, or the orange line in the chart, you can see that as a percentage of global GDP, intermediate goods, so the saddles, the frames, the brakes of the bikes, account for a very important share of global trade. Moving closer to our times before the COVID shock, we can see, but this has not changed. If we look at the recent data, global value chains, I will discuss this later, have been slightly changed, reorganized, and becoming more regional, but not less important in terms of absolute value. A very important share, a very important percentage of global trade is composed of trade in intermediate goods. So if we only focus on the final bike, we are overlooking a very important share of what happens globally. That is instead what regions could leverage if they design their policies in a way that fully embraces, fully understands global value chains, their dynamics, their opportunities, as well as their potential side effects. Global value chains account for almost 50% of global trade today. And all sectors except textiles increased their global value chains participation between 1995 and 2011, meaning that there are very important opportunities out there. Global value chains are expanding. More and more points, as you can see in the picture, are becoming connected by this intricate network of exchange of intermediate goods. Even non-exporting firms will compete against imports made globally. So participating in global value chains has become inevitable, because you will, as a local firm, even if you are not exporting, you will try to sell your goods as intermediate inputs for other firms operating in your local economy. But these local firms will have the chance to buy the saddle or to buy the brake from another producer internationally. So you will, in all our firms, are inevitably competing with other suppliers of intermediate goods, even if they don't realize. And very often, even firms don't realize. When we discuss, for example, about Brexit, very often firms were thinking about being fully domestic firms because they were not seeing themselves exporting to the EU. And so they thought, okay, Brexit might be an opportunity because I will not have to comply with EU standards. The problem is that they were very often supplying other firms that were in their turn exporting to the EU, and were therefore subject to the same standards and regulation as all other EU firms. As a result, the domestic UK, the UK firms that thought of themselves about being fully domestic were indeed just second or tier suppliers of other firms that were then exporting to the EU. This is to tell you that very often, even our entrepreneurs, the people that we discuss with when we discuss about, for example, smart specialization policies, have no idea about or struggle to understand what their own position in global value chains is. That's why there is a very important role for public policies in bringing global value chains to the center of regional development policies, raising awareness of the opportunities and challenges associated with global value chains. Estimations, this is the World Bank source, estimations show that a 1% increase in global value chains participation boosts income level by more than 1%, about twice as much as conventional trade, on which regional policies have mostly focused so far. So here you can see like the opportunities offered by global value chains participation in Europe, globally, and in particular for less developed regions. Understanding global value chains is inevitable, and a global value chains should become an integral part of regional development policies and our understanding of how regional development works. It is in everyday's headlines how the changing geopolitical landscape is trying to change the geography of global value chain. Okay, think about the US Inflation Reduction Act of August 2022 that has put on the table very significant subsidies to try and bring back to the US or bring to the US important stages of the value chain with the idea of reducing costs. But this in practice, in particular when it comes to green energies, for example, but this has much wider implications on the location of foreign direct investments, for example, of different stages of the value chain. So the US has launched this in 2022. This is a response and analysis of the European Parliament, try to see how the EU has put on the table a response to the US Inflation Reduction Act. And as you can see, in the final line, you can see this has sparked a severe transatlantic dispute, a significant tension, let alone the tensions and the changing geopolitical landscape in terms of the relations between Europe and China and what happens to investments and stages of the value chain that are located, for example, in China or that were located, for example, in Russia. So understanding global value chains is inevitable, and not bringing global value chains with the opportunity that they might bring, because when these activities are relocated, there might be new opportunities, for example, for regions across the globe. So it is fundamentally inevitable, and understanding global value chains means linking what happens on a global level, what happens at an international level, down to the ground, where global value chains touch the ground. So if I manage to convince you that global value chains matter and that they are an important component of our understanding of regional development, now we can try and see, okay, but why specifically and how specifically do they matter for regional development? Okay, let me give you an example. So we said that the global value chain, the value chain that becomes global when this happens across the globe, involves all the stages that go from the conception of our good, say our bike, so from the design, the R&D, the design, and then the logistics and all the acquisition of the different inputs that are needed, and the production, logistics, marketing, etc., etc. So all these stages in the value chain are associated with different degrees of value generation. Okay, so if I am doing in my country, if I am doing in my firm the research and development and design, I am able to incorporate, to attract a very high share of the total value of that product. If I am just doing the production, the physical production or the assembly, the value that I'm able to attract, that I'm able to control, to retain, to incorporate at the local level is much lower. Then instead, if I'm doing all the marketing, this is something that is a high value added activity associated with this product. So I am again attracting a significant amount of value. And if I am doing all the services or the post-sales services, again, there is a lot of value involved. So it's a very, this is what is called the smile curve, that tells us that most of the value is incorporated at the beginning and the end of the cycle that leads to the final product. And upgrading is fundamentally a way to move towards higher value-added components of the value chain, of this mile. If we think about the strategy of many multinational companies, that's exactly what they do. If you think about the famous example, maybe abused example, overused example of the production of the iPhone, what Apple is doing is fundamentally positioning itself at the two extremes. So it is doing, Apple is doing the R&D, all the R&D and the design of the iPhone, but it's not doing the production. The production is subcontracting to others. It's not materially owning the factories that produce the iPhone. When they step back in, because that's where they want to absorb most of the value, is when it comes to the Apple stores, to the marketing, to the services, etc., etc. Because that's where there is the juice, there is the big value that the company wants to incorporate. So it's very simple. Regions should fundamentally think about their regional development strategies along the same lines. When looking at the product, thinking about the whole chain that leads to the product, and reflect on how they can position themselves in a way that allows them to enter global value chains, to start contributing to global value chains, because there might be very important opportunities there. That's good news. I don't need to produce the entire bike. What I need to do to enter the production of bikes is to focus on one particular component of the bike, and I can take it from there. So understanding global value chains can be within easy reach of regions to enter, link up to global value chains, but also understanding, as I will argue, through global value chains mapping, where the value is, regions can think about strategies that allow them to move up along the smile towards sections of the value chain that attract more value locally. This is exactly what we mean by upgrading. Okay, this is what we say about the advantages of global value chains and what should be taken on board by regional development policies. Let's focus on the brakes for a second, okay? So I don't need to produce the whole bike, the entire bike. I want to contribute to the green economy. I don't need to try and develop all the capabilities that are needed to produce an entire bike. I can focus on a specific component. Say I've chosen a relatively more advanced component, brakes. So by focusing on brakes, if I have an advantage, if I have the capabilities to produce brakes in a way that is competitive globally, this means that I can enter the value chain But once I step into the value chain, I can think about how to upgrade. So once I have linked up to the chain, how I can move along the smile in such a way that I can attract more value locally. And there are two ways to do that. I can think about a strategy of horizontal upgrading. So I keep doing breaks. I keep producing breaks. Okay, I start low. I start with the simple part. I'm just producing the breaks. That's how I enter the value chain. Okay, I can produce breaks, but I can upgrade and go into something that is more advanced, that attracts more value. So I can go from the production of bicycle brakes, for example, to the production of brakes for electric bikes that are more sophisticated, more complex. They need to be connected with the engine and the battery, etc., etc. Or I can even go into car brakes. So I'm still producing, but I am producing equipments, I am producing intermediate goods that are more sophisticated, are more expensive in the end, so that they allow me to pay higher wages, generate higher profits locally, etc., etc. So one possible strategy can be a strategy of horizontal upgrading. However, another possible, these are not mutually exclusive, another possible strategy can be about what we call vertical upgrading. Vertical upgrading means going from the production of bicycle brakes into the design of bicycle brakes. Okay, I can move up along the smile from the production, going towards a stage of the production of bicycle brakes that is more sophisticated, a stage of design or even the R&D behind the product, behind the bicycle brakes. Okay, so I have different ways in which regions can think about their upgrading strategies. So how can regions upgrade in practice? How can regions harness global value chains? Okay. What regions have been told all the time, what a lot of smart strategies have been focused on, what I mentioned before, there's been a strong focus on the idea of focusing on final products. And so regions can be told you need to diversify, you need to move into new sectors. And this is fundamentally what is called, what the World Bank also calls the old paradigm. So you go from low to high value-added sectors with the focus on final goods. But I've shown you before that this focus overlooks a very important share of what is traded globally, that are intermediate goods. So a new generation of regional policies is a new generation of regional policies that focus on tasks, that focus on the stages of the value chain rather than on the final good. So like in our previous upgrading example, I can start with my basic production or assembly, that is a primary set of tasks that, of course, are simpler, easier, lower wages associated to them. But then I can go up towards medium skilled support and sales, go in the design, the commercialization, the after sales services, and then try and move up along the chain to the pre-production R&D, for example. It's not like high-tech, necessarily a high-tech lab type of research and development. Can be linked to food, for example, or very low-tech. I will discuss an example very close to the conference venue about tiles, for example. So this is not about an obsessive focus on R&D, on productivity, on high tech. This is about what is feasible and what can generate value by upgrading on a possible stepping stone offered by participation in global value chains. So what we do is moving from low to high value-added activities within sectors that already exist. So it's not about moving across sectors. It's about moving on sectors within sectors that already exist, on which the region has a strength. And by leveraging these sectors, regions can move towards progressively higher value-added activities and generate and incorporate more value locally. Firms, countries, and regions can move towards higher value-added activities in global value chains in order to increase the benefits. And these benefits are, for example, linked with security, if we think about the changing geopolitical landscape, higher profits, value-added capabilities that are generated from participation in global value chains. Okay, so I hope I convince you that it's very important to bring global value chains on board. And when we bring global value chains on board, we have another half of the sky in terms of global trade that becomes available to us. And so we need to rethink about our targets, the final objectives of regional policies, and we move into a world that doesn't look in moving on final goods and on trading final goods and shifting from one sector to another, but we move into a paradigm that focuses on value addition, on tasks, and on what we already have, on moving towards higher value-added activities within the sectors that are already present in the region. Let me give you like a very simple example. Okay, here, like below in the low part here of this map, you can see Alicante, where the conference is taking place. You can see in the middle Valencia, that is the main city in the Valencian community, the region that hosts the Alicante. And you can see up north Castellón de la Plana. That is a very important, very close to Alicante, part of the same region. That is a very well-renowned now ceramics cluster. Okay, and why is this important? Because today this is a major ceramics cluster, so nothing fancy. Okay, I'm not discussing about high-tech products that are unreachable for most less developed regions, but it's ceramics hub. It's a leading hub in Spain and in Europe. It provides goods for the construction sector. That is an important way to participate in value chains across the globe. But this hub has been facing multiple challenges throughout its long history, because producing tiles was not a very fashionable in the 1960s, in the 1970s, and there was a lot of competition to produce traditional tiles. However, the hub, the cluster in Castellón de la Plana, rather than saying, okay, I should diversify into a different sector, I should move out the production of tiles, has reflected on how to transform its tradition in the production of tiles into a strength to compete in the global market and supply inputs for other industries located globally in the construction sectors or hotels, for example. So upgrading was conceived as a pathway for growth, development, as well as resilience, because this offered opportunities for the region to respond to the numerous challenges it has encountered throughout its history. This upgrading, however, has been possible also because of the presence of global connectivity. This participation in global connectivity was possible because of the presence of multinational enterprises, so of some domestic firms that started interacting globally, that started opening subsidiaries abroad, creating the linkages between this particular hub and the rest of Europe, extracting, diffusing, and bringing in knowledge. So it was about domestic companies investing abroad, outward FDI, as well as foreign multinationals investing in the hub, inward FDI. But this is one possible channel, one possible pathway to upgrading. But the interesting part of this example is the process of knowledge exchange that was made possible, rather than to shift into different sectors, to learn from regions that were specialized in similar sectors, but had a different complementary knowledge. So in the Castellón cluster, for example, interacted with the Italian cluster in Emilia and developed wider global linkages. Okay, so that's the importance of staying focused on something where the local economy already has a strength, and looking globally in terms of knowledge acquisition, but also in terms of new markets and participation into other industries. These are the fantastic historic ceramics that come from Castellón, okay, that you can see here in the picture. And you can see that upgrading was possible, like I mentioned before, because of this embedding of the global linkages. We are not just multinational extracting local value and learning how to paint these beautiful ceramics and transplant this knowledge elsewhere. There was a whole ecosystem of local, small and medium enterprises interacting with indigenous and foreign multinational enterprises. That's why there is this importance of these input-output linkages at the local level. First and second tier suppliers that interact and participate in the value chain through specific hubs, in this case, were very often multinational enterprises. Okay. And so what they did is the example that I mentioned before. The cluster underwent a process of horizontal upgrading. So they had what we can call an end market and market upgrading, with firms moving into more sophisticated markets of high design, traditional, the embedment of traditional features into modern architectural design, dealing with thinking about new materials, for example, in order to improve the color and the resistance of the tiles for new applications, giving these tiles new markets, as well as process upgrading, with firms transforming input to output more efficiently or more sustainably in such a way as to contribute to what we can call green global value chains. So this is an example of something that is indeed possible, just one example nearby our conference venue, but gives us the idea of how participation leverages global linkages, offers opportunities for regions without the need to go into high tech or into the diversification into completely new sectors that very often have no linkages with the local economy. So this offers like a complementary strategy, we argue, a more feasible strategy for all regions, in particular for less developed regions. So how do regions upgrade in practice? Okay, so regions need to see, okay, how are these global value chains controlled? How are these global value chains orchestrated around the globe? And that's where we think the book offers some helpful insights, telling policymakers, but also scholars, how to understand, how to analyze global value chains. And so if you want to understand the big orchestrators, I mentioned the example of Apple. Inevitably, I fell into the typical example of the iPhones that many of us have on their desks, in their pockets now. So multinational enterprises, of course, like are very important orchestrators of global value chains, but they are not necessarily the only and not the most important. They are definitely the most important when we think about supplier-driven value chains that are vertically integrated. There is a vertically integrated governance by multinational enterprises like Apple that needs to control all the stages in order to have the final product exactly in line with its own specifications. But we have a very diversified set of value chains that are what are called the buyer-driven chains, where sometimes the multinational, they are coordinated but not governed directly by the multinational, where the multinational is, or the lead firm is controlling different suppliers across the globe. Think about supermarkets, for example, that can be buyers globally of different products that then are delivered by the supermarket chain. So we can, thinking about global connectivity in a global value chain lens gives us a different perspective, because we know that multinationals are important. As we argue in the book, FDI is an important vehicle to link up to global value chains, but it is not the only one. There are two other important components. What we need to do as a region, but also as scholars, to understand global value chains is to identify the lead firm. Ask ourselves, okay, what type of firms, think about the example of the bike that we mentioned before, what type of firm is orchestrating, is controlling this value chain, is governing the location of the different activities and the distribution of value? Is this a buyer-driven or a supplier-driven chain? And then also an important additional value added of the GVC approach is an attention to the universe of the ecosystem of suppliers, of local suppliers. So it's not only the hub, it's not only the multinational or the big firm or the lead firm that matters, but the whole universe, the whole ecosystem that surrounds the firm and forms first, second-tier suppliers that contribute to the value chain, that participate into the value chain, not necessarily directly, sometimes indirectly by supplying a hub that then participate in the value chain. So by looking at global exchange of goods and capital and focusing on intermediate in a global value chain perspective, we broaden the scope of our understanding of the global economy, but also of the link between the local and the global economy, because all of a sudden, we understand the role of multinational enterprises, but we know that the story is not only about multinational enterprises. We need to understand the lead firms. What type of firms are leading, are controlling the global value chain, its location, patterns, as well as the distribution of value along the chain and across space. But first, and second, we understand the importance of this constellation of suppliers around the key hubs of the value chains, and we understand or the lack of participation in the chain. So the landscape of our understanding of participation into the global economy changes completely. Of course, so the global value chain becomes a wider framework to understand also the role of multinational enterprises that many scholars have done extensively, and we review their work in the book that is fundamental also as an input to understand the regional economy. So multinational enterprises and FDI becomes one particular manifestation of the strategies of multinational enterprises within global value chains. So now with adding the global value chain framework, we have a wider framework to understand the position of regions in the global economy. And this is what we call the global value chain Louvre. Focusing only on FDI misses a very important part of understanding global connectivity. Understanding MNEs and their strategies enriches this picture, but we need to think wider, and we need to bring in global value chains into the picture and understand the role of intermediate goods fully. Okay, so here now we have depicted the entire framework, analytical and policy framework, and then we develop throughout the different chapters of the book. So let me now just very briefly discuss, okay, how this changes how we understand the regional policies. Okay, let me try and sum up with these key messages. So we think about global value chains. When we interact with global value chains, we can think about an horizontal and the vertical engagement with global value chains. What do I mean? Okay, look at this picture. Okay, here we have a value chain, any value chain, say our bike, the production of our bike. We know that there can be a multinational enterprise that is controlling part of this chain, a particular segment of the value chain, say the production of the gears of the bike. In a video that I will share with you that we have produced to better explain this concept, we discussed the example of Shimano, for example, in Japan. Okay, you can think about this multinational having an investment in a particular region because it needs to leverage some sort of advantage in another region through an FDI, through an external FDI outflows that lands in a particular region. Okay, so what we need to do if we want to participate in that particular value chain, we have Shimano, a Japanese company famous for the production of gears and brakes for bikes that wants to locate an investment somewhere. What we need to do is to make sure that our region has the right fundamentals in place, like the hard infrastructure that is needed for that company to operate in the region, the soft infrastructure and the needed connectivity. Maybe that there are the right fiscal conditions, the right tax framework, as well as the presence of the human capital that is needed, so the necessary education. But be careful, not necessary and not only the tertiary education, but the whole set of stages, including lifelong learning provisions that are needed for this type of connectivity. So we need human capital, we need skill training, we need management capabilities. We need the right labor market conditions, regulations, legislation, and frameworks. So the right conditions need to be in place. This is not different from what we have been telling regions and what regional policies, including the EU regional policy, has attempted for almost half a century. Okay, but here what we are arguing is to focus on these fundamentals, but not only looking inward, looking at the specific conditions of the region, but projecting these conditions and capabilities of the regions in the wider global economy. Not only focusing on final goods, but also understanding what the position, what the strength of the region can be when taking into account intermediate goods. That's the big change. So you don't only think about, okay, what type of infrastructure do I need for the local economy, for domestic connectivity? But when you think about what type of infrastructure you need at the regional level, you also think about what type of infrastructure I need to support my connectivity, my participation into global value chains, the participation, a wider participation, for example, if participation is already in place, of the regional firms, of firms already operating in the region to global value chains. Okay, so that's how we think, how we design what we do already, and for scholars, how we analyze the success and failures of the drivers of regional growth in a different context, in a wider context, placing the region in the big web of global value chains that I have depicted before. So this is the first way. The horizontal engagement is how we have been doing regional policy so far, but with a different lens, with a wider set of complementary objectives. However, there is an additional layer that has been significantly overlooked so far. That's the missing ingredient, if you want. That is the vertical engagement for regions to engage directly with global value chains. So regions from the local level can engage directly with global value chains, can engage directly with the global level. They can do so, for example, through investment promotion agencies that can liaise, and we have done research to show that, can liaise with the global level, with global investors in a GVC perspective in order to bring the key connectivity to the region, but can also work to develop the linkages between the value chain and the wider local ecosystem, can also contribute to build the ecosystem around the firm. Special economic zones are also an example when they are designed carefully and with a precise strategy in mind, not just to try and grab investments around in a sort of policy of territorial competition. So well-designed special economic zones. Local linkage units are very important to this idea, and aftercare programs. So these are different tools that can be used for a direct engagement, and we have done this, but to a very limited extent. But when this vertical engagement has been put in place, success can be measured and become visible. Let me give you 2 examples of this that come from our own research, looking at the role of investment promotion agents in linking regions with global value chains. And here you can see like where regional investment promotion agencies have been put in place, have been actively promoting foreign direct investment in less developed regions. This is joint work with Marco Di Cataldo and Maraggiua. Here you can see our synthetic example. So we have a region that before the activity of an investment promotion agency has been behaving exactly as its comparison, its synthetic comparison in terms of the attraction of high knowledge intensive investment. And you can see where there is the dashed line when an investment promotion agency started targeting a sector or is established, we can see that immediately the region that has a proactive strategy to deal with global value chains, to deal with foreign direct investment, becomes successful in attracting more investment in knowledge-intensive sectors, in knowledge-intensive activities, that it would have been otherwise without a direct vertical engagement with the value chain. So, and this is about knowledge-intensive investment in less developed regions. Let me close. There will be more examples being discussed in the conference. I know that Marco Di Cataldo will present joint research on how to create the connections between the hubs and the local economy and the ecosystem, so to facilitate expansion and prevent divestment from foreign investors active in the region. That is also very important. And we can see, we can measure visible benefits in less developed regions in terms of additional expansion of foreign activities. So foreign investors hiring more, that's what we desperately need at the moment, and divesting less. Okay, when we discussed about the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, when investors are pulled around, if we act at the local level, we can retain those investments very, very, very effectively. Just a quick reflection on the future of global value chains. We are in the midst of a big set of changes. That's why we cannot ignore global connectivity. We are in a post-pandemic economy. The conflict in Ukraine has changed the global geopolitical landscape. The energy crisis is changing the opportunity cost of the location of different stages of the global value chain. So this involves a restructuring of global value chains in part, and that's why we think there are important opportunities. And that's why we think that we cannot think about regional development policies and we cannot think about the future of cohesion policy without taking on board fully what global value chains mean. And global value chains are crucially important, and that's why I hope we will be able to discuss this in our Q&A session, in our debates that follow my presentation. Global value chains can facilitate the green transition. We argue in a new work with Oliver that by linking to green global value chains, the regions can bring in green activity, can green their own economy, can facilitate the green transition. And the tools that I mentioned before can be targeting to creating what we call a green red carpet, facilitating the attractions of investment that are green, that can be used as stepping stone for the greening of the local economy, okay? And also for the digital transition. The future of the use of digital technology during the pandemic, we used a lot of work from home, and I know that other co-authors, Davide Rigo and others, will present work that we are doing at the moment at the LSE on the digital transition and work from home. Also changes the way in which we organize global value chain in services. I use the example of the bike as an example of a product, of a final good, but we can think about services as well. And even the bike sharing that we use is an example of a services that leverages a digital infrastructure. So also the opportunities offered by digital technologies can be facilitated or can be hampered by participation in global value chains. So we cannot think about the green and the digital transition. We cannot fully take on board the benefits of the digital and green transition if we think about our regional economies in isolation. If we think about regional policies purely as local policies with just a connectivity component. We need to take the non-geographical proximities, the global value chain story fully on board and make it the center of our thinking about regional development policies and regional development theory. I'll close here. I mentioned the three takeaways at the beginning. I look forward to receiving any questions, and here there are some additional materials, videos, and we will keep updating the page for discussion on the book. Thank you very much for listening.
So thank you very much, Riccardo. It has been very rich and learned a lot about this question of high value, to move to high value added goods, and also how to regions upgrade. So it asks a lot of questions, including how to capture the value locally and what's the way to capture value. But anyway, there are a lot of questions in the chat. I'm not sure we can go to all of them. So I see that mainly there are three types of questions which are asked. One, there are few questions which are about the sustainable or the greening part of these global value chains. So I think it's very, very important. So you go briefly in the end, but maybe you can come back to this because there are questions on carbon tax, sustainable, greening, and so on and so on. There is another group of questions is about the difference between global value chains and global production networks. Is there any difference? Is it the same thing? What is it necessary to go to global value chain when we have global production networks? And there is another type of question. It's about the good and the bad impacts of global value chains locally. So I try to summarize them because we have a lot of messages. I'm sorry I cannot respond to them, but you will have them in the chat, so you could contact people and to discuss with them privately. But if you could go to these three main points, I think it will be interesting because mainly we have about 10 minutes discussion now.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you all for the very interesting questions that I'm now seeing popping up in the chat. I will please follow up by mail, on Twitter, LinkedIn. Be very happy to engage in this conversation because we are doing a lot of work on this topic and we really need ideas flowing. So on the green global value chains, we are doing work on this idea. And here, why do I think global value chains are important when we think about sustainability and the green transition? Here, The idea is that a lot of policies, even when thinking about, or lots of debates at the moment, when thinking about the greening of regions, have focused on the idea of green technologies. So we need to convince regions to develop new green technologies. However, if we look at the patenting, so where the new technologies are produced, we see that the generation of these technologies is even more concentrated, spatially, than the production of or general technologies, not necessarily green technologies. So the opportunities to become leader, to develop your own advantage in the generation of new to the world, patentable green technologies is rather limited. It is a possibility, but what you need to think about is more credibly, how can you use green technologies, how you can incorporate green technologies in order to do in a more sustainable, greener fashion, for example, what you do already. That can be something as simple as using solar panels to transform tomatoes, okay, in the countryside of southern Italy. And only shipping tomatoes, it's something that is very low value added. But if you can add an intermediate stage of transformation, because you also have the sun, and so you have free energy, and you can use an off-the-shelf technology to have an intermediate transformation of that, you can go into something that can have its own market. And you can, for example, add, and we have done work on this, on denominations of origin. This means that more of the transformation of that product happens locally. And so you can add more value locally, and you can sell also the place. So the green transition is offering new opportunities for regions to do things in a more sustainable manner, not necessarily to develop new to the world technologies. I'm not saying that technologies are not important, innovation is not important. What I'm saying is that we need to look at innovation in a different manner. And the participation in value chains becomes an important opportunity, because the new, more sustainable tomato sauce that I'm now able to produce locally can become part of a wider food industry. So can go into further transformation, for example, can be frozen, can be exported by the food industry. So I can participate, but now my negotiation, my bargaining power is different, because I'm not selling raw tomatoes competing with everyone. I'm selling something that is more finished, something that has more value, and it is something that can sell the place as well, and can attract more value locally, but also more green value if what I'm doing using sustainable renewable energies, for example. So I think thinking about the green transition in a way, and the ceramic industry example is very pertinent in this regard, because when we try and reduce the carbon footprint of the industry, contributing to the industry by producing the tiles with less material, that is something they are doing thinner but of equal resistance type of tiles, they can reduce the carbon footprint of the industry, of the construction industry, that is that has a very important carbon footprint, and generate products that leverage their existing strengths that generate value locally. So the issue is not the carbon footprint of transporting the tiles in itself, but it's how, because if we do this in a sustainable manner, the existence of global value chains is not something that conflicts with sustainability. It's how we green the global value chains that matters for sustainability. And through lead firms, we can send important signals to the different suppliers and to the different parts of the value chain in a way to speed up the greening process. So global value chains are very important channels to facilitate the greening of entire industries, as well as the green transition at the local level. There are two important issues that needs to come with that. Is an understanding of the importance of value chains for the opportunities of the green transition. And so we need the right regulation. This will not happen by itself. So that's the national framework, the international, the supranational framework, as well as the right type of local policies to make sure that these are opportunities, that we don't go into, it's question number 3, the bad impacts. The participation in global value chains doesn't become an extraction of local value, an extraction of local talent with no benefits for the local economy. I don't want to give like a fully rosy picture here, like it's a complicated balancing act. But the issue becomes, if we, as scholars, in regional science and as policymakers dealing with regional policies, the most important policies, the EU cohesion policy in this regard in Europe, the most important example, the whole world is looking at it, overlooks this dimension. We let big firms, we let the lead firms to dictate the standards, to lead this process. So that's why we need sound regulation, we need sound policies, we need academics that can understand what is going on and that can inform and offer evidence to policymakers to be able to lead this process, to guide this process. We cannot hide under the sun. The world is changing, and the sustainability challenge and dealing with mitigation and adaptation of climate change is our responsibility. And we know that cities and regions have an important role to play, a fundamental role to play to adjust the balance of this process in a virtuous manner to the benefit of local communities. But we need to be aware of this and be able to offer policymakers the tool to understand the advantages and disadvantages of this. So the more like to conceptual question on global production networks, global value chains, there are lots of debates in the literature on this. The global production network is a very, very, very important stream of literature. We review a lot of the work here in the book. Here, we need to take the most important messages on board and make them available and use their analytical power and the extent to which they can be used by policymakers. The reason why we went for like a global value chain nomenclature here is very practical, because that's what policymakers discuss about all the time. That's what, if you look at the Inflation Reduction Act, that's about the reorganization of value chains. That's what international economics, international business. So we just went for something that is user-friendly, but there are and can be understood outside our own discipline more widely. But I do think there are important points of synergies, and it really doesn't matter the nomenclature that we use. There are very important points of contact. What matters is that we look for evidence and we look for tools that can inform sound evidence-based policies and sound research in a way that gives us a wider understanding. So we should not close our debates and say, okay, there is one label or another. We really need to see, okay, what are the synergies, very pragmatically, what can we learn from the different streams of research and bring them together. We do acknowledge that in the book, and I think there is a very, very fertile ground for research at the intersection, at the combination of these different streams of research.
Okay, thank you, Riccardo. There are a lot of questions in the chat. Okay, you say you will respond afterwards, but there are a few questions about the topic of developing economies and less developed regions in Europe. How could they scale up this kind of challenge and taking place into the value chain? And just to finish, I would like to add a question about the impact of this change on the future of cohesion policies and smart development policies in Europe as well, which are not totally different.
Thank you. Yeah, I think these are very important questions. So when we think about less developed regions, I think that's where like global value chains become particularly important, because if we have very interesting and very important cases of successful development in the emerging economies, for example, from Asia, from China, from India, and we review some of them, but also from Bangladesh, from Thailand, that we review in the book as important examples where like countries and regions understood, okay, there is no way in which I can enter a certain sector by producing the whole bike. And so the strategy has been exactly that of understanding, okay, given my conditions, given my strength, given the capability, the skills that I have available locally, what type of segment can I leverage as a stepping stone to enter the value chain? So that's how you design your strategy. And these very often in less developed regions or less developed region in less advanced countries have seen the opportunities from value chains. So that's how, when you think about the regional development policies, you need to map your position in global value chains. In the book, we argue that global value chain mapping is a very important exercise. You do not only a mapping of a growth diagnostic of your local conditions, but you need to place the region in the wider set of opportunities offered by global value chains. And global value chains can offer important stepping stone, bringing in activities and knowledge that might be missing in the local economy, connecting dots that otherwise would be impossible to connect with policies only based, inward-looking, only based on what exists in less developed regions. With the example that I have shown, that's why we were very, very interested in this research on investment promotion agencies. Not because I think investment promotion agencies are the solution, but I just wanted to give an example of a particular institution or a particular organization that can be set up even in places where institutions are weak, where we know that the institutions are weak, like Southern Italy, for example, in some of the less advanced regions in Europe, and in particular in Italy, where there is an historical problem of weak institutions. And we cannot go to the regional government, tell them you should improve your institutions. If they knew how to do that, they would have done 50 years ago. So a more credible message there is, okay, I tell you something that you can do today, that you can set up today with the resources that you have available, or additional resources that can come, like Poland did, that come from cohesion policy or that come from the recovery plan, at least at the startup stage. One small fix. It's not the solution, of course, but there is something that we have shown with data that can work against a suitable counterfactual. What happens without that agency, where this agency is not available? So that's a small thing, a small stepping stone that can allow, in particular, less developed regions, including, and we are doing research also on less developed countries, so outside Europe, to show that these tools can work in practice to start up, to set up the conditions for this global connectivity, this participation into global value chains to become useful and productive to the enhancement of local communities. And we have seen that the investment promotion agencies are sometimes more effective than special economic zones, that sometimes tend to keep their benefits very secluded within the boundaries of that area, while investment promotion agencies can be given a wider mandate to connect investors everywhere to firms everywhere. Facilitating impacts and contributing. We call them plumber of the local ecosystem. So they are not the solution, but they can be one possible stepping stone to start the process of change. So that's more a way of thinking about, okay, what can be done in practice to set up a small fix that can then bring in ideas for change. The investment promotion agency then talks with the foreign investors, with lead firms, and can go back to the regional government and tell them, look, we don't need a new station where your electors are, where you want to get more votes. No, we might need this train station, or we might need this new road here, because that's where a small cluster is forming. So they can work as pressure groups to facilitate the development, to facilitate productive development, to facilitate doing business on the ground in less developed regions. So that's why, I think this way of thinking is very important, in particular for less developed regions, because a lot of these things happen naturally in more advanced regions. That's where they are most studied. But where we need more research, where we need more understanding, is how we can make these things work in less developed regions to generate and bring about new opportunities to less developed regions. And that's where, it also, I hope, in part answers your question, Andrea, on the future of cohesion policy. It's very important that cohesion policy brings these ideas on board fully, while up to now, most of the tools, most of the investments have been focused mostly on a local focus, a European focus, but very much inward looking, without fully leveraging the opportunities of global value chains, including European value chains. So my feeling is that, thinking about the future, we have a unique opportunity to bring this idea head-on, fully on board, leveraging the evidence that now exists to offer tools, to offer opportunities to regions, to to leverage and engage with global value chains. That's a very important opportunity, thinking about the future to design a new generation of regional development policies that are fully connected, fully open to connectivity, rather than having connectivity as like an additional component. Like I discussed, you need an horizontal, so to think about all the components in a global manner, but also offer regions the tools and the opportunities to engage directly with the value chains that can work for their development patterns.
Okay, thank you very much, Riccardo. I see we are down on time now. So thank you very much for this very, very, very interesting introductory lecture. I think we start very well the Congress. I'm sure that people are very enthusiastic because there are so many reactions in the chat. So please carefully contact them if you can and discuss with them, because there are a lot of really interesting questions. I really greatly apologize to have skipped some of these questions, but we are out of time now. So thank you very much, Riccardo. Thank you very much, everybody. And we continue in a few minutes with the special sessions. And please do not forget tomorrow morning the lecture by Julie Legolo on spatial econometrics. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Riccardo, and enjoy the Congress and have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.